Okay, let's start. My first question is about legendary upgrades in 7.3.5. I know it's a little bit heads up, but a lot of people have a lot of legendaries by now. If you compare it to 7.1.5 or the last time, is there any change to happen so that it is easier to upgrade them?
We haven't. I mean, we haven't nailed down the exact plan there yet, but I think so. Actually, wait. No, that's a lie. We have. So when Taurus the Burning Throne opens, that'll be later in the year, of course. There'll be, and it's not necessarily tied to a patch, right? I mean, I think we think of it as something that's part of 7.3. Another patch might come out first, but it's still 7.3 content. The item level ceiling will rise, so everything will go up by 30. New legendaries will drop at eye level 1,000 at that point. And yes, our current thinking is they'll just be the same upgrade quest. I think, especially in the most recent round, we've added more sources, including heroic dungeons. We've fixed some of the loopholes and problems that made people waste them or not be able to get them. And so, really, you can have at least 2 legendaries upgraded right away. They're still better than anything else you have on your character. I think that's the key thing. I understand that it can feel like, it's going to take a really long time to get all of them upgraded. But for most people, there's a relatively shorter list of the things you're using most. And even if you haven't upgraded them, again, it's not like there are other items that are suddenly better than those that you would equip instead of them. So it's not, honestly, it's not the most elegant system. I'm not going to argue that, having this many things, having to upgrade them every time is great, but it works, and we don't really have any plans to change it.
Okay.
Okay, for me, the first question is, Legion is coming to an end. Will it be possible to wear 3 legendaries at the same times by the end of the expansion?
So, it's something we talked about in the past, and I think the more time goes on, the less we like the idea. I think when we first actually thought about the system, we'd imagined that the equip limit might go up over time. But one of the problems with legendaries currently, actually, in conjunction with set pieces, is actually how many item slots they sort of tie down, that they make irrelevant for other loot. It feels like one of the reasons why I think, for example, the weekly Mythic Dungeon chest often doesn't feel as rewarding as we would like it to is, if you're a raider, you might actually have a 4-piece set bonus, a 2-piece set bonus, and 2 legendaries equipped. And any of those slots, any other item is not going to be something you consider. So we're really hesitant to increase the number of slots that we're occupying even further. So I think while it might be fun to have different, 3 legendary combinations and it could allow for some powerful combos, I think it would make itemization in the rest of the game worse.
Okay. Sorry. And do you plan to increase the drop rate of legendary items?
So we've done that multiple times over the course of the expansion. There's also a very large bonus to your very first and second legendaries on a new character, or if you don't have any for a given spec. And so I think based on our data, we're seeing that most people are getting those legendaries quite quickly. We're not continuing to expand the pool of legendaries, so I think we're only adding 1 new legendary item in 7.3, and that's available as a crest reward for kind of completing the entirety of Argus and then eventually going into the raid when that opens. So that's actually a guaranteed legendary for those who want it. So, over time, people who are dedicated to their characters are getting all the legendaries for a given spec, and even we're starting to see some people getting all of them, period, for all specs.
So let's go over to Mercy Plus.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about the changes in 7.3? Are those similar to the 7.2 changes? And what about the item level of those gear that drops in those chests?
In 7.2, we added some new affixes. We added things like bursting and explosive. We don't have new affixes that we're adding in 7.3. We think at this point there's enough diversity, and with it's a 12-week rotation now. A lot of people haven't even seen the new combos more than once or twice, so it doesn't feel like we need to change that up. What we are doing is, at the same time as we're introducing a brand new dungeon, so there's the Argus dungeon, Seat of the Triumvirate, and that is, parallel and tunes and rewards gear comparable to what you'll find in Argus. we're raising the difficulty and the rewards of the rest of our dungeons to keep them all relevant. And so there's that same transition that we saw in 7.2. Baseline heroic and mythic difficulty goes up, the reward quality goes up. What that also means is that, yes, mythic plus difficulty goes up. So in 7.3, the ceiling, I think you'll get the best rewards from doing a mythic 10 now, which is similar to what it was in 7.2. Once Taurus the Burning Throne opens up, once mythic difficulty of that opens up, the ceiling goes back up to 15, and of course that will reward loot that's comparable to heroic Taurus from the end of the run and mythic Taurus from the weekly chest. It's more or less the same as what we did in 7.2.
Okay. But will the item level increase this time? Last time it was...
I want to say that a mythic 10, I want to say you'll get 5 eye levels higher from a mythic 10 in 7.3 than you get from a 15 right now.
Also from the weekly chest in 9.35 item guaranteed, or?
I think so, but I'm honest, I'm not 100% sure off the top of my head. So apologies if that's wrong.
What did you choose to create a new legendaries that improve the Crucible instead of just improving the Crucible when you defeat the final boss of Antorus? Player will have to make a hard choice for their legendaries.
Well, so I guess I think that there's some strong theming in the legendary. I think tying into the Crucible and the powers in Argus. Ultimately, it can be much more powerful as an effect if it's an item that's competing with your other two legendaries versus just a passive bonus that essentially everyone would get. I think if we wanted everyone to have it, we would have just made the baseline Crucible abilities stronger. I think it's an interesting choice, particularly, I could see situations where, to use an example off the top of my head, if you have a couple of relics that have bonuses to avoidance, let's say, that reduce AoE damage taken. As a tank or someone who's dealing with some AoE damage mechanics, wearing the legendary ring might actually give you a significant amount of avoidance and give you a unique defensive benefit that you can't get from any other sources. That could be a cool sort of choice. So I think the idea of adding that to the decision space for players, knowing that everyone's going to have it once Raid Finder is open and they've been able to go through and defeat that boss, if they haven't done it earlier in another difficulty, felt right.
Speaking of the Crucible,
Sure.
I have some personal problems with that system because there's a lot of RNG involved. If you see the final traits you get in the final row are always RNG. If you have one relic, for example, from a raid or from anywhere else, always you put it into the Crucible, there are different traits in the final row.
Yes.
And it makes it soulbound, so you cannot trade it afterward to other players. You don't see that as a problem for organized groups? I mean, okay, for pickup groups it's not a problem at all because you have the personal loot and you get all the loot you get, mostly. Yeah. But for organized groups, if you want to give the relic to the player who need it the most, it can result in a thing that you disenchant the relic right away because it don't have the two top traits on it.
Well, so a few issues there. I think in terms of the randomness, I think making them random actually for the vast majority of players will mean that more relics are useful and that on average relics can be better than they have been before. Because it means that you have, because you're choosing. We're not just giving you additional random perks, we're saying here are 3 options, pick the one that you like best. So that means that, whereas in the past, if you were, let's say, a Ret Paladin who wanted Avenging Wrath relics, you might only look at the 1 or 2 bosses, and sometimes you might even have to look at a dungeon specifically to farm to get that trait. Now nearly any trait can have that relic, or nearly any relic can have that trait, and that makes your options, I think, much broader than if we were picking specific options where some people would be happy, others would be unhappy. Here, everyone can benefit. Now, in the organized raiding situation, arguably it's not too different from tier set pieces, the tokens, where you don't necessarily know exactly what it's going to turn into. I think you make the decision the same way. You make the decision based on the information you have. You see the item level of the relic, and you see the base trait. And if there's someone in the raid who has a terrible relic in that slot, and it's a clear upgrade for them, you give it to them. If there are two people for whom it's a side grade and it might have the potential to be good, then you give it to one and you see. I think the reason why we're soul binding it when you examine it in the Crucible is actually to avoid what would be the really awkward gameplay of you pause the raid, multiple people hearth back, you look at it, you trade it to someone else, they look at it, you compare. This way, you give it to the person who seems like they might need it most, and the result where you think it could be an upgrade but you end up disenchanting it, I think is not going to be as common as what most people expect. That's more of a side grade sort of space, right? It's like using a tier token when you already have that set piece and you're hoping for a socket, you're hoping for Warforged. So it has the face, it has the trait that you want, and it's a higher item level thing. I think when you can pick the best of the 3 extra traits that it rolls, the odds that it actually ends up not being an upgrade, I think, are very, very small. We're continuing to take a look at large trait imbalances, and I think we've improved some of the ones that are useless or considered very bad.
Okay.
Another advantage of this system, actually, is that while there are some specs, I believe Brewmaster is one of them, that have some considerable value from so-called utility traits that don't appear on raid relics because they're bad for most specs.
Yeah.
If you're an elemental shaman, you wouldn't want to see a healing surge relic drop off a raid boss. But for some, healer and tank specs, there's a lot of value to those. The Netherlight Crucible actually also now lets you get them from, comparable raid loot that you're getting anyway. So
okay.
I think there are upsides to the system. I understand, it's not specifically in the case of organized raiding that's trying to min-max everything, and you want perfect information. You'd like to see exactly what it's going to be. It could be better, but for the population as a whole, we're happy with the system.
Okay.
How did you choose to design Argus? And we get the feeling it is a more new small continent than a zone.
Yeah, Argus it's a planet, and I think we knew that it needed to feel like more than just a small zone because there's a world there. So obviously it's ruined, large portions of it are uninhabitable, and so we chose to focus on 3 distinct regions. We wanted to give different environmental feelings. We said the first area, Crokun, where you land, is more wilderness. It's obviously there's Legion presence, but it's not the exact same, just black and green everywhere that you've been seeing on the Broken Shore. We felt like that was important also. We wanted some variety visually. It was also one of the major elements that led to us adding and focusing on the Macquarie subregion, which is a mix of visual breakup. It's getting away from that Legion color scheme and architecture, but also a chance to look at the history of the Eridar and the Draenei and the planet. So yeah, I think as you move around with the teleporter network that you unlock, it's a varied gameplay space, and we're happy with how it's given the sense of exploring a larger world.
Okay.
So my next question is about Tomb of Sagaras in 7.3.
Yes.
The first one is 2 tanks on Musa Kil'jaeden. The most tanks on Kil'jaeden were druids, guardian druids.
Yeah.
I guess it is for the raw.
It's stampeding. It's the fact that they can talent Stampeding Roar to have half the cooldown, which means that you can use with 2 tanks. You can Stampeding Roar every single Armageddon. Yeah.
So, are there any plans to change something in the system, or also in the whole difficulty of the Tomb of Sagaras Music for 7.3?
I think it's certain that there'll be further tuning changes, the same way we saw changes to fights like Gul'dan and Grand Magistrix towards the end of Nighthold to make them more accessible to groups that are getting there later on. It's challenging. It's hard to redesign that in a way that fixes that problem. For example, we recently did a hotfix that made the Shadow Souls in the Illidan phase death grippable, so that if you have a Blood Death Knight for Gorfiends, that can be a huge advantage just to get out of that very quickly. You can pull them all together, save some time, and that may be a reason to include a Blood Death Knight. We'd like to tune the fight to the point that it feels like a wider variety of guilds who aren't stacking the same classes can succeed. It's one of the challenges when making a fight that's very hard. I think for a while, and I mentioned this a little bit in the Q&A a couple of weeks ago, I think for a while we've been pushing difficulty and trying to find the limits of the top guilds. And I think we found it. I think Kil'jaeden was a fight that was honestly too hard. It was certainly an incredible challenge for Method and for Exorcist in particular, as they were able to really show that they were a cut above the rest of the world, and Method was able to prove that they were superior to Exorcist, and that was impressive to watch. But the lengths that they go in terms of class stacking, in terms of race changing to goblins, things like that, that's not a healthy place for the end game to be.
I don't think also.
I think I can, it's odd to say because you would want to think that, well, of course, the next raid, the end boss is even more epic, so it should be harder. I think that the end boss of Entorus should not be as hard as Mythic Kil'jaeden. I don't think it's healthy for the game to have a fight that hard.
Okay.
The patch 7.3 brings on an important change for the First Death Knight and Elementary Shamans and Feral Druid.
Yes.
Changes for Death Knight and Shaman are welcomed, but players are concerned by the changes for Feral Druids. More turning plane for this spec before the release of the patch.
We think we have the tuning right to offset the changes. It's possible that we're wrong. I think we do most of our pure numbers tuning via hotfixes once we can see the data on live, and that's something that we'll be responding to quickly. What I would expect is probably 2 weeks into 7.3, I would expect to see a wave of tuning tweaks based on the data that we're seeing. And so, as always, we want things to be balanced. Obviously, some classes and specs have some strengths in some areas, weaknesses in others. But overall, we want everyone to feel competitive, and we'll look at the numbers to make sure that's the case.
Okay.
So I'm a little bit confused about crafted gear in 7.3 or even 7.3.5. I am able to upgrade, let's say, my Darkmoon card for my Brewmaster, not any further than 900.
Correct. There are brand new crafted items. There's a brand new version of this Primal Obliterum, and the new crafted items using the Argus crafting materials, those and only those can be upgraded using this new material. You can take your Darkmoon cards to 935 or whatever.
So not in the future, not with 7.3.5.
Correct.
Bye Darkmoon card. Okay.
It had a good run, really.
Yes.
Exactly. Those.
In Legends, Druid artifacts bring a new bear and cats forms, but no Moonkin or Treant form. Why?
Because you can see the weapon when you are a Resto Druid or a Moonkin. You can see your artifact, you can see the visual customization. Whereas a Feral Druid or Guardian Druid form, you obviously could never see the weapon at all, so we had to do something. And it was an opportunity to really differentiate specs that previously literally had no customization at all for their characters, unlike Resto and Balance.
Okay.
So I have another question for the Crucible.
Sure.
Do players will have in the future more points to spend, let's say, in the last row of the Crucible, or will it be final only 1 point per row?
I think our current thinking is 1 point per row, and then at artifact level 75, you'll have all 3 relic slots fully accessible. Now that may change. Obviously, we'll see how the system plays out in practice. It's as with all of these things, it's a design. It's also a little bit of an experiment. We're trying something new, something a little bit different, and we learn from things as we go.
The unique reward of Paragon chests are really rare. Do you plan to increase the drop rate with patch 7.3 or not?
Sorry, I didn't follow the first half of the question.
The moon in
Yes.
Aragon chest.
Oh, okay. Yes. It's a good question. I actually don't know for sure. I agree that those are probably rarer than they should be. They feel like rewards that you can often, really focus on getting that rep and still not get after a long time. It's something we'll discuss.
Okay.
So there were some Kultura-themed items data mined back in the 7.3 PTR. Have you any information about that?
No, I mean, various things make it into builds, and there's internal naming schemes, but never trust data mining too much.
Okay.
The last Heroes of the Storm trailer showed Jaina as a Dreadlord. Is a troll from Blizzard, or it's a big hint for what's coming next?
No, I think, Here's the Storm, very much what they do is not canon, and they're having fun, and obviously, thanks to our good friend Jesse Cox, there's the great Jaina Dreadlord meme, and memes make for good skins, but Jaina's not a Dreadlord. Do not read too much into what you see in other games when it comes to WoW lore.
Okay.
Also, Karazhan is not a disco party, contrary to Hearthstone.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I know. Shocking,
there's
right?
no Ice Cream Citadel
No.
somewhere around the
Also
world?
no Ice Cream Citadel.
Okay. I'm a little bit confused about the end boss of this expansion. I mean, Argus the Shatterer, okay, but are we fighting actually Sargeras in that, or don't want to give
You have to
us...
see. The Dungeon Journal currently
It's
deliberately is
blank,
blank. So I think the Dungeon Journal won't be blank by the time players get there. This isn't one of those things where we want to make it hard by hiding abilities. It's actually just specifically, we want players to experience the story. When I talked about Argus in the first place at BlizzCon last fall,
Yeah.
I deliberately said almost nothing about Argus. We knew where the story was going to go, but there was no way to explain how and why we were going to Argus without spoiling the end of Tomb of Sargeras. We wanted players to see that for themselves for the first time. I think once players have played through the 7.3 story, then it'll make more sense where we're going and why it's happening, and you'll see.
Okay.
After the defeat against Sargeras, the Titan souls have drifted for the millennia through the cosmos. How did you, Sargeras, find them?
I think exactly. Well, so it's interesting. 'Cause actually, I've been asked a couple of questions this past week. Aren't the Titans dead? I think the answer was no. It was there were these essences, pieces of their soul essence that remained. He's had a lot of time to work on it, and yeah, I think it's the key is that I think it's what he's managed to work with are these Titan souls. When you see Agrimar, for example, that's not the actual Titan Agrimar. The Titan Agrimar would probably step on you like an ant, but it's an avatar that's been infused with the power of Agrimar's soul, corrupted by Sargeras.
Okay.
And there's a similar story with some of the other Titans that you may deal with.
Okay. We spoke about Exorcist and Method a few
Yes.
minutes ago. They complained a little bit about time that takes the devs to fix some particular bugs on those encounters. Do you have any comments about that?
Yes. So there weren't bugs. There was only one thing that we fixed on Kil'jaeden that I would actually consider a bug, and it wasn't something they were even using. So actually, in the Illidan phase, it was possible for, if you were scouting the corners to see where the singularity would drop, it was possible for the visual to not properly show up, but they weren't scouting the corners, they were just brute forcing it anyway, so they weren't affected by that bug. Now, we took longer than we might have to make tuning changes, such as changing the timing a little bit to give more time to react to Singularity and Armageddon back to back, things like that, and they struggled initially. Some of this is frankly, I promise that our internal test team was able to execute the portions of the encounter. Now, obviously, what we can do internally is skip to 2 minutes of the fight, play this sequence, do it again, do it again, do it again. It's doable. Obviously, guilds on the live server can't do that. It's much harder for them to practice. And so it took some time for us watching their attempts to decide that, no, this isn't just hard, it's too hard. And obviously in retrospect, once we came to that conclusion, it would have been great if they hadn't had to waste as much time. But their practice obviously still proved beneficial when it came to progressing further in the fight.
Players are wondering what is gonna happen for the artifact after Legion. Do you have anything planned?
So we've said a few times now, the artifact really is a Legion feature. We wouldn't have designed it the way we did if this was something that players were going to keep forever. We don't have plans to, in a future expansion, add 50 new traits for every artifact, or never again drop weapons in the future of WoW. But we know that at this point players are also very attached to their artifacts, so we need to make it meaningful as they move on. We need to make it make sense within the story and the context of the game to do so. But one thing we have said we are doing also is, when that happens, players will be able to retain the appearances that they've unlocked and use them as transmogs in the future. So if you really like your Flaming Ashbringer, you can keep using your Flaming Ashbringer. The only exceptions there will be skill-based appearances like the Mage Tower challenges or Mythic 15, which you'll have to do before the end of the expansion if you want to earn them.
Okay.
But you can use them.
But you can use them, but those won't be earnable in the future, kind of like challenge modes in past.
Okay.